Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, I have a very special guest with me, Martin Popoff. We are going to be discussing his new book, Flaming Telepaths, Imaginos Expanded and Specified. Martin Popoff is a Canadian music journalist, critic, and author. He has written over 90 books on hard rock and heavy metal and has written more reviews than anyone on this planet and beyond. He's also the senior editor and co-founder of Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles. You can find him all over YouTube and on podcasts on Banger TV. He has been called heavy metal's most widely recognized journalist, and I would absolutely agree with that. I'm a huge fan of Martin's work, and Martin has been here at the Lair before. We're here, though, today to talk about Martin's new book, Flaming Telepaths, Imaginos Expanded and Specified, which is a timeline-heavy expansion of Sandy Pearlman's Imaginos mythos as draped across the Blue Oyster Cult albums. So Martin, thank you so much for joining me here today at the Lair.
Yeah, thanks, John. This is going to be fun and challenging, I think. So we'll see.
Yeah, all right. Well, all right, Martin, let's first explain to the audience what or who, or shall we say who, is Imaginos and how this ties into Blue Oyster Cult. Also explain to the viewers who Sandy Pearlman is and his part in the story and Blue Oyster Cult.
Okay, so Sandy was the early conceptualizer and manager of the Blue Oyster Cult, and he also was involved in lyrics along with other people, band members, Richard Meltzer. So he was the manager of the band all through their golden period, and as I say, a sort of key lyricist in the whole situation as well. He went on to manage Black Sabbath briefly. He's the producer of the Clash's Give Him Enough Rope. But as it pertains to this Imaginos thing, so he's definitely an intellectual. He was a prof later on, and he has all these really cool theories about the origins of heavy metal in 18th century, 19th century classical music. But when it comes to this Imaginos thing, what it is he had kind of a rough story, just notes, as Albert or Joe Bouchard will tell you from the band. But these notes had been also put into song lyrics, a few song lyrics, not that many, that apparently they would have in a binder sitting like on a table or an amplifier or whatever. And in the early days, along those first couple of albums, 1972, 73, Blue Oyster Cult self-titled, Tyranny Mutations, Secret Treaties. So these would be sitting there, and if somebody was kind of at a loss for something, they'd go flip through Sandy's book and see if you could see an Imaginos lyric that you want to take a stab at singing or whatever, or try putting a song together. So essentially, I'll get to the story in a second, but essentially what happened was that over the course of the Blue Oyster Cult albums, there were a handful of songs that go along with this Imaginos saga. But it wasn't a concept album. We'll get to that in a second. So you had this sort of parachuting in and dropping down conceptually across those first few albums with these few confusing lyrics that everybody wondered, what the heck are these all about? And then later on, when Albert is kicked out of the band, he conceives of doing a solo album that would finally do the Imaginos concept album. He started that in 82. It didn't happen until 88. And necessarily for the commercialism of the whole thing, the band got re-involved in it. And it came out as this album called Imaginos, which was the concept album. But it's a little bit, there's a lot of guest stars on it, and the productions are kind of up and down all over the place. The music is not particularly inspired. There's a redo of Astronomy. So it wasn't that well received. It didn't sell that well. It wasn't particularly toured and played live. Albert and the band were kind of forced together into this situation. So that's really where we get the anchor thing of Imaginos, and that's this record right here.
Yeah.
Right. With the Cliff House on the cover and then the back.
Yeah.
So essentially what the story is it's quite complicated, but um, Sandy's overall thing with it was to say this is a story that explains the occult origins of World War I, right? Now, it doesn't really do that, and we'll get to that in a sec about the book, but what it is essentially is something a bit akin to H.P. Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos. And Sandy, prides himself on being somewhat of a progeny, is that the right word, of Lovecraft, because he grew up in that whole area, Miskatonic, the woods, west of Boston kind of thing. And also went to, there's RISD and there's Stony Brook and there's all this kind of, Boston to Rhode Island to Long Island axis, right? So essentially what happens in this story is there's kind of an alien / aquatic birthing of this figure in 1803, 1804, something like that. So essentially there's this figure that is born, and he kind of moves through time up until about 1893. So he gets to about 90 years old. So there's this 03, 04 to 93, where the idea is that he's a shapeshifter and he can morph into various figures, or, as I'm sort of positing, more like possess different figures. And essentially he's put on Earth by these alien type beings to test mankind in terms of evil. So he's a little bit of a Christ figure as well, and a devil figure at the same time. But the idea is that Sandy just sort of put it out there and didn't really fill it in, that this is the occult origins of World War I. So you're left to sort of suppose that essentially who Imaginos is tapping on the shoulder, whether he's inhabiting the soul of the person or turning into the person or whatever, would be political figures. But these political figures, all along the way, there's a little bit sort of to do with, there's a lot of America in it, which isn't really World War I, per se, in terms of the starting of World War I. And there's not a lot of political figures that would go that far back, because World War I doesn't start until 1914, right? But along the way, I guess the other big thing here, the important part of this, I guess, that I've left out so far, is that there's kind of a magna of illusion, Black Mirror situation that is sort of the undercurrent of the story. And essentially what happens is Imaginos sails across the sea from Cornwall, and eventually at the end, steals from, I think it's the Yucatan Peninsula, or I believe that's how it works. He goes to Haiti as well, and there's New Orleans and all this involved in it. There's voodoo. But essentially what happens is that this Black Mirror, and this is confirmed in the back of the book, I put an Albert Bouchard interview, and we kind of clarified this, and this is what he thinks happens as well. So essentially at the end of the story, this Black Mirror comes back to Cornwall, and, as is said, is thrust in vivo into the ground, or handed off to the daughter of Imaginos, who is now like an ancient kind of a sea captain guy. But essentially what happens is this mirror emanates bad vibes that causes World War I, to put it bluntly. This mirror has come, and it's embodied with a bunch of evil. It's almost like an obsidian version of a shadow figure in a way. And so the mirror is now sent to, or stolen from Native American culture, and brought back to England, where it sits there emanating bad things. And eventually, of course, World War I is actually caused by the assassination of the Archduke, all these country states that are still fluid, Austro-Prussian Empire and all this, getting their wires crossed, egos wanting to conquer this nation or that. I include Rasputin in the story as well. But the idea in terms of Sandy's story is that it all starts with this black mirror.
Yeah. All right. So this is a pretty ambitious topic to take on because, like you said, it was never really completely fleshed out by Sandy. So, what inspired you to write this book, and have you ever tackled a concept like this before?
Well, I've tackled a concept like this before when we talk about the structure of the book, because it's a timeline book and it's probably like my 30th timeline book. So I love building these timeline books. They're a lot of fun because as you build along, the more you build, the more you see dates overlapping and things happening on the same day or the same year or whatever. So in that respect, it was quite fun to put together. What made me do it was the idea that, as the subtitle says, expanded and specified. They don't really go into the occult causes of World War I, or Sandy doesn't at all, i.e. there are these notes that nobody really talks about having been seen. I don't think they've been rescued after Sandy's death. I think he died 2016.
Yeah, 2016.
But there are the lyrics and there's the long explanation in the Imaginos story, and there's this short explanation on the back of Imaginos there as well, right? So number one, it ends and there is no real explanation of the occult causes of World War I. And the other thing that I found really interesting is just without Sandy, can I build a case for there actually being occult causes for the start of World War I? Because everybody knows the occult causes of World War II. There's the whole Hitler and Thule Society thing and all of that stuff, right? Eugenics and so there's a lot of things we know. There's been a lot of documentaries about how occultism works into Nazism, but World War I, not so much. So what I sort of worked on expanding and then specifying was we have to have Imaginos inhabit definitely political figures to help cause World War I, but also I was fascinated by the idea of Lovecraft being an artist, Sandy being an artist, writing whatever the medium happens to be, fiction. But so the idea of bringing in some of the occult art, because you have to have, I figured there has to be the tie-in of the Victorian occult revival of the late 1800s into the 1900s, and necessarily there's a lot in here about the German occult revival as well, and symbolist artwork and all that stuff from the 1800s, the ideal Aryan Teutonic kind of thing. All that stuff is in here as well, because to have an occult cause of World War I figured you got to bring in Crowley, and you've got to bring in, I thought you have to bring in Austin Osman Spare, because my favorite artist, he did a lot of crazy occult art. And oddly enough, Austin Osman Spare actually became a World War I war illustrator. So I've got those guys in there. I've got Lovecraft in here, symbolist art, stuff like Franz Stuck with that wild ride. That big painting that Hitler based his look on that came out in the 1890s, I believe it was. So all of that symbolist art and Wagner and all of that. So I basically came up with this thing where all of the stuff that was going to be part of the occult cause of World War II was actually really all gestating from the 1800s right up until 1914 anyways. I mean, most of the stuff that everything later was based on was stuff that came out around then anyways, and it all kind of ramped up after that. So the idea was that I had to find suspects for Imaginos to possess to be the occult cause of World War I. And I love the idea of, Alan Moore has often said that when you create a piece of art, you're actually, executing magic, right? And I figured Austin Osman Spare, he was a magician. He wrote magic books. He did magic, and then he did this artwork. And is the artwork itself magic? Because you are conjuring something out of nothing, right?
Yeah.
And the idea also, Sandy is going back to H.P. Lovecraft, but then there's the whole stream of thought. Kenneth Grant kind of started this, and it's gone on through Peter Levenda, etc. That even though H.P. Lovecraft calls himself, an empiricist and a scientist and an atheist, and he doesn't believe in all this stuff, and they're just stories, and there's nothing paranormal about it. There's a whole pile of people who want H.P. Lovecraft to be almost a religion, in that they're going to say H.P. Lovecraft didn't even know this, but he was actually writing about true history. He was channeling, the idea that he was seeing visions of the past rather than visions of fiction.
Right.
And so I love that idea too, that that maybe this is all true, right? And so everything in this book, 90% of it are actually true timeline entries, but there are the entries that come from the Imaginos thing, and then also in the timeline entries, I quickly go on to extrapolate a bunch of stuff that is fanciful. It's not true, and I could give some examples of that. I've marked a few passages to read if you want to. Go that
well,
go ahead. I'm rambling on. Ask me another question.
It's a lot of fun because, like you said, I love the way you sort of weave the Imaginos character shape-shifting into, not only maybe the obvious suspects like politicians and things like that. You even mentioned like composers like Bruckner and Liszt, and how, maybe Imaginos wasn't 100% in these people, but they all sort of play a part in this, alchemists and astronomers. And of course, this all ties into, Blue Oyster Cult making all kinds of references to astronomy and some of these things. So they're like you mentioned in the timeline, for the viewers out there, what Martin does is he's going, kind of month by month, almost year by year, specific dates, much like you mentioned, your other history of metal books and stuff like that, where you do timelines. So there's a ton of dates and important historical events mentioned in these timelines. So how did you tackle that? Did that require a lot of research, getting, how deep did you have to go going back into your history books to just sort of, get all these dates together and all this? Did that take a long time to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I would follow a topic, right? I mean, John Dee and his mirror, his shoe stone, and all that. So alchemy, you just follow that and go, okay, I'm going to do alchemy for a few days. And I would go through and find all the alchemical spots that fit. And always in the back of my mind, knowing my Blue Oyster Cult up and down, left and right, I would quickly go, wow, they said something about that. And I would write that in. So every entry would get richer and richer as I went along. Or if I spotted, and then after the fact, if I spotted a lyric that I haven't really talked about, I go, wow, that really corresponds with that. And I'd put it in. And the book goes right back to, essentially Stonehenge and stone cairns and stuff like that. And I come up with this idea. So the book starts in 5000 BC, I believe. But I start with the idea that Stonehenge and stone cairns and stuff like that, when you see stone formations in a circle, stone circles, are actually the partially submerged jawbones of a giant alien ancient race. Or, in certain instances, they are an alien that has been buried, hundreds of feet deep vertically with his hands sticking up, and the bony fingertips form a stone circle. And so things like that, right? So I had to find an ancient alien source for, for these old ones or great ones, or lays invisible, lay invisible, who are, one of the many terms used in the Blue Oyster Cult thing about them. So they are the race that, and there's an interesting thing where there's a veil that has to be pierced with they can't do this job on Earth. They need an earthly being. So Imaginos also is in some way a Men in Black figure. He's like an approximation of a human being. So he's running around doing this stuff, and he's got special powers, and that's how he gets into it. Let me I'll just so explain how one of these timeline things kind of gets away from you. I'll just find one here and mention it. So 1830. It's an example of how this book sort of works. Well, let's start with this one. Early 1830s. Imaginos in his late 20s attempts to travel to Mexico from New Orleans towards the Yucatan, but he is shipwrecked and he drowns, after which he is revived by Lay Invisible and the Oyster Boys, who sound like monsters out of Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. There are oyster beds, Plasha's down. It is predestined that Imaginos will live as he was lost to nothing on a Bay of Dreams. Indeed, he soon dreams the Luxor dream. A lot of this is in quotes because they are quotes from Blue Oyster Cult lyrics. Let's see later on. Imaginos, yeah, this is a key passage which kind of explains the whole thing. Imaginos becomes the crypto-reptilian's agent on Earth. The Egyptian reference is a metaphor for his rebirth. There is much voodoo imagery in the song Lays Invisible. Perhaps the shipwreck then is in the Caribbean, which is also the first landing spot of Columbus. Recall there's a voodoo-inspired Lovecraft story set in the swamps of Louisiana and based on voodoo cults. Lay Invisible is another name for Loa or Mystère in voodoo culture. In the song Imaginos, Samedi and Petrie are mentioned. There are also this song maybe Kept the Black Man Out There Baby. The Black Man manifests in Lovecraft's mythos as Nyarlathotep. Goes blah, 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 on and on. Inanies, evil is generated, conjured, or increased. The ultimate conjuring for our tale is World War I, posited by, let's see, and the strange voodoo imagery. Hang on, let me go to the end of the story. Actually, yeah, there's one more that I wanted to mention that shows this idea of how. Yeah, so 1784, Ebenezer Sibley sees publication of the illustration of the occult scientists. In effect, it is an early grimoire, and as such, it is a book that documents facets of reality, aids in the soiling of reality, such as the causation of war through conjurings, and or in fact produces history, literally producing it materially. So that's what I talked about. This idea, can art actually be reality, right? As Sandy posits, can a dance be time? Meaning, can art or words create reality backwards in time? Indeed, on November of 27th of this very year, a paper is presented by John Mitchell in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London that proposes the concept of black holes for the first time ever. So I found two things as you build the timeline that both showed up in 1784. And then I find a third. The following month, we get Immanuel Kant's publishing his essay answering the questions, what is enlightenment? Finally, in 1784, a year in which we learn new ways to see the world, Benjamin Franklin invents bifocals. Combine the four solitudes and we are back at John Dee's mirror. So that's just like what happens in 1784. And I found four things that kind of correspond to the story as you keep building and building and building. And that's the funnest thing, really, finding things that happen on the same date, right?
Yeah, and I love the way you sort of tie in, you know, you mentioned the art and artists, and it's all, like you said, it's sort of the creation of art and music is sort of magic, and this plays into, you know, this whole timeline thing. And I really like this idea. I'm a big fan of, and I'm sure there's people out there that are the same as me, they're fans of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And right now in that universe, it's all about timelines and alternate realities, and this idea of, you know, people going back in time and affecting and altering history, and sort of this whole concept of you know, just people nudging history to go in a certain direction or having an influence, and everything sort of tying in with everything else. It's really, it's great. And when you start thinking about it, you can start making all these, it's sort of like tentacles, you know, Cthulhu tentacles here stretching out to all these different things, but yet they're all sort of connected to each other. So
yeah, you know, one key kind of lynch point on this idea of reality versus fiction was that, and Peter Levenda has written, you know, a book almost based on this whole concept, is that at the very same time on Halloween of a certain date, that you know, Lovecraft is very good with like specifying dates, right? And so there's this thing about Cthulhu, and then apparently at the exact same time in reality, Crowley was conjuring the demon Cthulhu, spelt slightly differently. So that's kind of in there as well. And then just to draw another parallel with this idea of Kenneth Grant saying, "Oh, actually, what Lovecraft was doing was real." It's a little bit like, okay, what you just mentioned about the Marvel universe. Sandy coming up with this story is he could be doing one of three things. He could be writing fiction. He could be actually seeing a vision of what the true past was, like this Imaginos thing really is the cause of World War I, or most mind-bendingly, by coming up with this, did he alter history and actually change history by creating this art equals magic, right? So maybe this piece of magic that he created actually changed history back then. And lo and behold, this is all the actual cause of World War I.
Right. And Sandy thinks he's writing fiction, but it's really, it's, it plays with your mind. There's a lot of symbolism involved in the Imaginos story that you touch on that also ties in with BOC. For example, telescopes, that plays a sort of a part in the story. That plays, Blue Oyster Cult has a song, My Black Telescope. Water is very symbolic here. Imaginos kind of comes crawling from the water. Also, the number 7, there being 7 invisible ones, the creatures who create Imaginos in a way, or give Imaginos his powers. And we see 7 referenced in Blue Oyster Cult with like 7 screaming Dizbusters. So talk about the various symbols that sort of reappear between the story of Imaginos and pop up in Blue Oyster Cult, because I found that really fascinating, the way you tied in even album covers, the flag on the car on the front of On Your Feet or On Your Knees, and the War of the Roses, and all this stuff. I thought that was really cool. So talk about sort of your thinking with, tying all this symbolism in between the history of Imaginos and tying it in with Blue Oyster Cult.
Yeah, so I guess in an abstract general sense, first of all, is like there really are only, I don't know what it is exactly, half a dozen or 8 or 10 lyrics that are like, yes, these are part of the Imaginos story. And then there are other ones later that even ones that weren't on the album, because Albert went and did Reimaginos, right? So he did a new version of Imaginos just like a year ago or 2 years ago. And he's actually going to do Reimaginos 2, which takes it up to World War II. And I've been thinking of doing an update of this that takes us right up to the present time as well. But the neat thing is there are so many other Blue Oyster Cult lyrics that you can say, again, along the lines of what we just said, is like, Sandy didn't even know this, but that's an Imaginos lyric too, right? And it wasn't even written by him. It was written by Richard Meltzer or Patti Smith or John Shirley or whatever, right? And they had no idea, but they have no control over it anyways, because the gods are controlling their minds.
Right.
Yeah, they're just conduits, right? Because artists, right? Remember, artists are one type of person that are considered closest to that veil and able to poke through and pierce it once in a while.
Because artists will often say, where was the inspiration for this song? I don't know, it just came to me. Or you think of Bill Ward often talks about there was a 5th member of Black Sabbath, this sort of unknown, inspiring, thing. They don't know where this is coming from. It's just sort of coming through them. And this ties in again with, maybe this is what's happening with Blue Oyster Cult, even when they don't realize it, that it's coming through them when they're sort of aware of it, but even when they're not aware of it, it's coming through them.
Yeah. But, and to answer your question, I mean, a specific, the one I can sort of think of the most, you mentioned telescopes. So the neat thing about telescopes is that it's about seeing further than a standard normal person, right? Seeing farther, seeing deeper, seeing more intensely. But there's also, there's a lot of eye imagery and blindness imagery in this book as well, and the Imaginos story. But again, more so in the book, because the book is greatly expanded and specified, right? That's the whole point. So, when I say these things are in the Blue Oyster Cult lyrics, it's 10 times. When I say it's in the book, it's 100 times, right? Mm-hmm. But the other thing about telescopes is that it's also, when you look into a lens, it's also a mirror as well. And Blue Oyster Cult has a lot of mirror imagery, right? They have an album called Mirrors as well. And they have a song that posits, women looking into a mirror and, thinking about their self-image and all that kind of stuff. But, and then mirror imagery leads to John Dee and the Shoe Stone, because the idea is that with black obsidian in that. And I also tie in, by the way, basically another version of the Magna of Illusion, or a black mirror, or the Shoe Stone. First of all, in Blue Oyster Cult is Moorcock's Black Blade, but also Led Zeppelin the Object. So Led Zeppelin the Object is, I've done all these pictures, right, which we can talk about, but I've drawn the Led Zeppelin Object into a few of these pictures as well, right? But the idea of the mirror, or the Shoe Stone, is that it reflect it. Well, a couple of things. It reflects like a mirror, but also you're seeing visions of angels and the future and all that kind of stuff in the thing. But also it's meant to be deep black, because it's supposed to absorb all light and cause you to be more in a meditative state as well, a state of nothingness and nihilism or whatever, right? So the reason it's black obsidian is all of those things, right? And I even, I have one of my drawings is a picture of Gavrilo Principe, I think that's his name, the guy who assassinates the Archduke, reflected in the Shoe Stone, right? And then and all these are titled, and it's a long story, but there's a whole image key that when people order the prints, you get the image key that explains all the pictures. There's 32 pictures in it. But the other neat thing about the assassination is that it was a drive-by procession kind of thing, like the Kennedy assassination, which also it is referenced in Blue Oyster Cult lyrics later on. And Blue Oyster Cult, if there's to be a part 2, a lot of that has to do with there's a little bit of that, the birth of rock and roll culture at the same time with the Beatles. There's secret societies, biker gangs, UFOs, all that stuff comes into it later.
Yeah. So you mentioned some of the pictures. You held up a few of them there. So let's talk about the illustrations in the book, which in my opinion are fantastic. I'm going to try to show some of them on the screen here as we're talking, but I know you have a few there also. There's 36 pencil drawings in the book that illustrate various historical points in the timeline. I know you're an artist as well as an author. So tell us what went into the drawing of all these great pictures.
Yeah, so what I really wanted to do with these, for example, there's a young Aleister Crowley in front of the Cliff House. So what I wanted to do was, there's Marston, long story, there's Marston inside the Cliff House. So the idea of showing you those two is what I wanted to do is combine things that didn't necessarily go together or didn't necessarily happen. That's one thing. Combine things that couldn't go together because it would be bending time, where there's one of, well, here's Edward Bulwer Lytton. And so I'm in the back, I've got an offer of selling prints of these. They're all 8.5 by 11 prints. They're all on I printed a few of each one because everybody orders different ones, right? So they're all like this on gloss card, and I number them, and they're all numbered out of 72, signifying, so I'm only making 72 of each, signifying, the year of the first Blue Oyster Cult album. But yeah, so the idea is that here's Edward Bulwer Lytton, who wrote The Coming Race, which has real energy in it, which is part of the whole occult history of the German occult revival. But in the background, I've drawn in an Austin Osman Spare painting from World War I, but this picture of Bulwer Lytton is from like 50 or whatever years earlier. So I like the idea of combining things that couldn't be combined. And then the last thing is that all of them are essentially like vintage photography. And that's why the prints themselves are sepia tone, and my layout guy did these nice borders around them, but they're all sepia tone like that, with, fancy little writing down there for the title, which are all quotes from Blue Oyster Cult songs. So the idea was that I wanted everything in here to be vintage photography from the early days of photography, and then putting things together that didn't belong, just to kind of emphasize the idea that there is this time travel element of what's going on. We've got young Winston Churchill here put into a science class.
Right.
that kind of thing. We've got, that's just another straight Cliff House.
Right. Should be mentioned, the Cliff House plays a part in this story. It's the image that's on the front of the Imaginos album cover,
Yes.
and that ties into sort of the history of Imaginos. And
yeah, there's a lot of that in here, and there's a lot of pictures of the Cliff House and the Cliff House burning down. And I've got a Led Zeppelin object emerging out of the thing, out of the smoke. So essentially, I put the Cliff House in here because it was important to the cover, but also there's all these tie-ins with the airship mystery of the late 1890s, which ties in Charles Delshaw's drawings, which nobody is sure are fact or fiction. I've drawn one of those into a Civil War scene in one of the images, but so these are airships that were possibly tested out in the woods of Northern California. And lo and behold, you've got the airship mystery over San Francisco, and you've got paranormal events in California, and ley lines, and Crowley visiting California. So I've drawn like Lovecraft also into a scene in front of kind of a fake photography scene that they would do for the Cliff House when tourists would visit. But Adolf Sutro is a Prussian. He's the guy who built it. And then there's the baths, and it's a cliff on the side of water, and there's all this
the water symbolism, and right.
Yeah. And Prussia was essentially the seat of the cause of World War I. Sutro is from Prussia. Even Delshaw himself was from Prussia. The guy who came up with these drawings. So I had to tie in all of this UFO imagery as well. And part of the reason was that apparently these airships were powered by something that this mysterious figure named Peter Menace invented called SUP, S-U-P, which is like a green liquid that is like perpetual motion fluid, right? So there's a tie into Vril energy, which was misappropriated from the fiction work of Edward Bulwer Lytton of The Coming Race, and turned into a whole cult philosophy religion of the German occult revival that really leads to the Nazis in a certain way. So yeah, all these things tie in, and other things like Crowley's visits around when he goes to New York. Like I learned things like disaster follows Crowley, like when he arrives in New York,
like
the Hudson fires, the earthquake, Galveston tornado, all of this stuff. There's all these natural events that follow, and they're also part of the Imaginos story as well. There's a big storm in the Imaginos story. The more you build up a timeline, the more like, hey, I've got another 1784 here. Look, it goes with this. This is really weird. Right. This is cool. And you write it in, right?
And there's you mentioned the UFO thing, and of course that's something that with Blue Oyster Cult that they get into every now and then with songs like ETI and Take Me Away and stuff like that. So again, this all sort of ties in. Now, and also I just want to make one other comment. I love the illustrations. I said that already. What really got me going with the illustrations was maybe this is all meant to be. Right before you sent me, you sent me a copy of the book. I had been looking at these things, these pictures that people say are proof of time travelers. They've got a picture of some guy that looks like he's wearing something from the 1970, right? A wristwatch, right? Exactly, right. And then when I saw your pictures, it sort of has that same vibe to it. Like here's this normal setting, but there's something a little strange in that one. What's that doing there, or what's that person doing there? So I thought that was really, really cool.
I could find another one of those. Yeah, there's the cool one. I've sold quite a few of this one. This is the Starfinder, which was an actual cool little Starfinder thing, and I stuck a Blue Oyster Cult related shot in there. There's just some dancing girls, nice, looking really creepy, And then that's the Delshaw airship drawn into a post-Civil War thing. So I've got Edgar Allan Poe in here, Ambrose Bierce. Because you have to have the birth of horror writing, right, to cause horror art later on to have disturbing things that would cause people to start wars in a way.
Yeah. So at the end of the book, there are, I believe, 3 appendices. One of them tells about, and I found this really interesting, how Imaginos kind of became, or was in Jim Morrison for a little while. And this is sort of how the Imaginos story gets told to Sandy Pearlman, sort of connected to Sandy Pearlman in a way. And you look at some Doors songs and show the connection in the lyrics in these Doors songs to Imaginos. And you also do the same thing with some Grateful Dead songs. So I thought that was a really cool, the way you sort of tied that in.
Yeah, I thought that was just a silly thing to put at the end, but actually it has a little bit of meaning, because when Blue Oyster Cult first started as Soft White Underbelly and Stock Forest Group and Osaka and all that, and they were looking for a sound, you know, the early version of the band, there was quite a bit of kind of loving and influenced by the Doors and Grateful Dead, and I thought it was pretty interesting that these were in there. And this is also the cauldron of early rock history. Sandy and Buck were both involved in like early rock criticism in Crawdaddy. So that whole thing from the Beatles through the Doors and Grateful Dead is kind of a magical period that I sort of imagined, you know, maybe this stuff occurs elsewhere as well as sort of a seed. And I came up with a little intro to it, to a little thing there. And then another one of the appendices is a very recent full interview that I had with Albert when he put out Reimaginos, because I thought, you know, here's two people struggling with trying to figure out exactly what Sandy meant. And I got some interesting, you know, clarifications from Albert about what he thought he meant. And then there's one last appendices, which is a bit of an odd one. It's like the continuation of the story past World War I, but in skeletal form. I didn't really fill it in, but I wanted to put that there because it's more like these pages are what the second book would be, but vastly filled in. But I thought, you know, so many things started earlier on. Like I wanted to finish Austin Osman Spare's life, and I wanted to finish Lovecraft's life, and bring in, you know, Grant on Lovecraft and Grant on Crowley and things like that. So, and finish Crowley's life as well. So all of this stuff kind of ends, you know, happens after World War I. So I thought I had to put that stuff in, but then I held myself back and didn't go too crazy about, you know, the connections, because I thought, just like Albert is thinking with Reimaginos too, is that there's a whole second book to be done.
Yeah, and you mentioned Albert, and Albert's always sort of been the champion of this storyline in a lot of ways. I mean, originally, this was supposed to be, they were thinking of doing like a trilogy, you know, 3 double albums, you know, covering this whole Imaginos thing. And then, as we talked about earlier at the beginning, you mentioned that Blue Oyster Cult did put out an Imaginos album, but it was under a lot of, you know, it took many years. It originally started as an Albert Bouchard solo project, and that's a whole video in and of itself. But basically, it felt sort of incomplete in a lot of ways. That there were some songs missing from the timeline. The way the songs were ordered on the record didn't quite follow in order. So Albert, just recently, like you mentioned, in the last year, has done his Reimaginos album, where he's gone back now and sort of filled in some of the gaps that were missing from the original Blue Oyster Cult Imaginos. So you did mention that were you sort of communicating with Albert on and off while you were writing this book? Was he helpful in sort of filling in some of the gaps and everything in the storyline?
Yeah, before I get to that, I mean, I want to mention you and the awesome John Schwartz did an incredible job, like going through Blue Oyster Cult recently, right? So that's an episode everybody should watch in terms of educating themselves on Blue Oyster Cult. But no, I didn't have any conversation back and forth with Albert, except for that one big interview, and then I did a piece. I wrote something about, you know, promoting that project. But one cool thing is Albert used 2 or 3 of my drawings in the lyric videos that you can see on YouTube. For a couple of the songs in there. And he used the larger original black and white versions, not these things. Actually, there's your Ambrose Bierce drawn into the interior of the Cliff House, right? That's the one that's the bonus print. That's right. That's why this is thick. So what I did is with this print situation, there's like a thing in the back of the book that says, okay, buy a print, buy 2 prints or whatever. And what you get always is the bonus print that wasn't in the book. plus the image key, which is kind of a big, long explanation. I don't have it. Oh, there it is. This thing, a two-sided thing that explains every picture, because there's no explanation in the book on the picture. So you get this, and you get the Ambrose Bierce mystery print plus whatever you bought, sort of thing. And I send those off. But the one, yeah, so that's all the correspondence that there was with Albert. And there's really no reason other than I could fire his imagination about what to include maybe next time. And probably this book will, because he's read it and he claims to really like the book and think it was really cool and all that stuff, right? But I'm sure he's gonna, there's gonna be a few ideas that might come from that, because again, you go back to Sandy's thing, and he didn't really leave that much. I mean, it actually, it behooves people to, if this is going to get expanded, i.e. the exact same way the whole Lovecraft mythos has been expanded by other writers, it has to be, because it was way too short before. I mean, Sandy left way less about this than H.P. Lovecraft left, for example, on all that stuff. But Albert's second one, Reimaginos 2, I think it's either going to be called Bombs Over Germany, or that's part of the subtitle or whatever. So it also necessarily goes into essentially World War II, which I'm hesitant to do, because I don't want to write a book about Nazis, right? A whole book. Right. I mean, that's the problem, right? I just, even typing the name Hitler, is like kind of weird, right? And talking about all this stuff. And that's why the first one was quite interesting. But the second one, I'm kind of hesitant. Frankly, what I'm probably going to do is angle it more towards UFOs and biker gangs and secret societies and maybe the occult revival of the 60s as well, which this all fits into, and then tone it down on the on the World War II stuff.
Yeah. Did you ever have a chance to interview Sandy Pearlman, and has any of this Imaginos stuff ever come up?
Definitely, a few times, and probably the most the most thorough explanation of this thing in their own words is in my proper Blue Oyster Cult book, Agents of Fortune, which is just your narrative book, the story of the band, right? So all of that is in there. And so, yeah, I have talked to, all the guys about Imaginos, and there's quite a bit in there, the full chapter, of course, on the album and stuff. But there's also that amazing video. I'm sorry, I don't know the guy's name, but on YouTube, you can see this incredibly scholarly, like it's over an hour long. Yeah. Great video on the whole history of Imaginos. And, anybody who wants to learn anything about this should definitely watch that video as well. Besides you and John Schwartz, the expert of all time on this stuff. Bull Gregmar too is a big BOC expert, but John Schwartz is killer.
Yeah. All right. So do you have any kind of final thoughts you want to share on the book, on this new book, or any information you want to share with the viewers out there, maybe where they can purchase the book or get more information on it?
Yeah, I don't think we need to babble anymore about the book. I think people get the idea what it's about. So yeah, martinpopoff.com. I've got a supply of them. I mean, I've got anything that I have in print is at martinpopoff.com. There's PayPal buttons there. I sign them, send them out from the office here in Toronto. So yeah, this book is available, but I'm down to about the last half box. So I think I may be doing a reprint, but you never know. But yeah, I've got 30-ish of them left, 25-ish left. But I got to do something. I got to make a decision soon whether it's going to get a reprint or not. So.
Yeah, and for everybody out there, I've really enjoyed it. As you don't even need to be a Blue Oyster Cult fan to enjoy it. It reads like a good, story, like a science fiction mixed with reality type of story. And if you're a Blue Oyster Cult fan, it makes it even more enjoyable because you're getting all these references and connections to Blue Oyster Cult. So it's a lot of fun. But I did find one problem in your book, Martin. I think when you do the second pressing of it, I think you're going to need to add this in as like a little addition here, a little new date. I think you're going to need to put in that on July 27th, 2021, Martin Popoff finds himself at the Lair of the Alchemist discussing the science and alchemy behind the book.
Yeah.
Question, is this a coincidence, Martin?
Yeah, I know, because you're called Lair of the Alchemist, right? So that's the thing, yeah. And there are some funny alchemy things at the end of the book about cowbell. The whole cowbell thing is included in it as well. along with the Nazi bell technology thing too, right? So there's all this alchemy and bell stuff in there too. But you're right, and there's some typos to fix as well. I know that as well too. So I may do that, but yeah, very cool.
But it's an awesome book, and I encourage everyone out there to go out and buy it and check it out. So. All right, so Martin, thank you so much for joining me here at this layer and this really fascinating discussion, the diving into your book and the whole Imaginos storyline. I appreciate it.
Very cool. Thank you. This was fun.
All right, everybody. So leave some comments down below. Let us know what you guys think. If you've read Martin's book already, if you haven't, go out and get it. Let us know what you think about the whole Blue Oyster Cult and Imaginos thing. And until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.